How about you?
Yeah, I think everything that Dr. Patucha said is great. The only thing that I would add, I guess, is that a lot of times when I see PhD students that are early on in thinking about what publications they might want to shoot for, right? If you're thinking about the types of internships that you would want to get, sometimes that can help you guide you towards what types of publications that you would like to shoot for, right? So if you're like the PhD student I had a couple years ago that really wanted to get a machine learning job in Silicon Valley, right? Machine learning jobs in Silicon Valley are being filled by a lot of people who are getting their PhDs from Stanford and Berkeley and MIT and places like that. And all of those students are publishing in the top tier international conference proceedings in their field, right? And so I told him, what you need to do is you need to really aim high with your publications to get in those same venues that you're going to be competing against these other PhD graduates from these really top-notch schools. Now, again, depending on the type of area that you're going into, if you're in a field where there's a particular conference that a lot of people who work industrially in that field publish in, a great thing to do is to try and see if you can get a paper or a talk in that conference or a poster in that conference, because not only will that give you something on your resume that people who are in companies in that field will recognize, right? It'll also offer you the opportunity to go to that conference and network with some of those people and tell you about their work, and having those networking opportunities and meeting people in different companies. You never know when that's going to come in handy. It might not be right away, but you might be able to, as you're getting closer to graduation, reach out to those folks again and say, hey, are there jobs available at your company?
Go ahead, David.
In terms of the resume, I would say absolutely you have to make sure that it's complete and it lists all the stuff that you've done. You have to make sure that your resume makes you stand out a little bit, right? Why are you sort of different than somebody else? Don't take this the wrong way, Ray, but when I was talking to the guy who runs the R&D group at Motorola about my program, and he was interested in our students, he's like, computer vision students are a dime a dozen. He's like, I can get hundreds of them. He's like, the problem is that most of them have no idea where the pixels came from. And that's why he was interested in our students. So you have to figure out a way in a very crowded landscape to figure out how to make yourself stand out. So for my students in imaging science, because it's a unique degree, I always tell them, list the cool courses that you've taken, right? So if you've taken any upper level, you don't have to list all the courses, particularly not all the way back to your undergraduate degree. But if you've taken some very specific courses related to your work, you should list them as sort of relevant course material or something like that, something that's a little bit different, so that when people look at it, they can say, oh, you took this class in XYZ, what was that about? And if you had, as I think Ray said, if you did projects in that class or things like that, add a little meat to it. Don't just say, I took this class. What did you actually do there, right? If you work in part of a research group where there's multiple people there, make sure you highlight some of that sort of stuff somehow on your resume. Definitely go to conferences and list all the conferences and presentations that you've ever given and any publications that you've gotten, all that sort of stuff. Another thing I would encourage you guys to think about doing is, I think it's for $50, you can buy something like 250 business cards through RIT. Formal RIT business card, it's got the RIT logo, and you basically put on it your name, your contact information, PhD candidate, right? Because that's what you are. And then when you go to these conferences, hand them out to people, right? This is still a very good way to make sure that that as Nate was saying, a year later, you can go back to that person and say, oh, hey, by the way, I'm about to finish up. I'm looking for a position. Is there anything in your group or in a similar group to yours that might be open?
I just have one more follow-up question. And it kind of leads into the next one, which one of our Cyril has, is it. You talked about the resume and building it. Should they be building a resume now? I don't think we got to that question. And yes, build it now and have it looked at by who? Who do you want them to look at? Who should look at their resume? Who should help them build it?
Definitely at least their advisor and their program director. That would be a start. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're the ones as advisors or program directors where companies are coming to us to talk about what they're looking for students. So we sort of have a good feel sometimes for what you might want to put on your resume relative to what the companies are.
And I think one of the points you made is that to build it now, if you don't remember what you were doing in this particular project 3 or 4 years ago, and you wait to build that resume, then you don't have the opportunity to have everything on there. I know I'm the moderator, but I think one of the things I learned in co-op and career services was that you want to start keeping track of all the projects that you were a part of, what research you took advantage of, what courses you took, who the people you met with along the way. Because you're going to need that for networking. And I think that leads to my the next question we have. Cyril, go ahead with your question because I know it related to networking.
So I'll just say that it's important to be persistent. In other words, even if it's just an email or to colleagues, usually what happens is somebody will reach out to me, great, and it'll get lost. 2 weeks later, I'll forget about them forever. So it's important that you continually, I don't want to use the word pester, but you contact people, stay in contact with those people over time, if nothing else, to see how they're doing. And if people want to do a Zoom chat with you, and you say, of course, you take them up on that opportunity.
Any more on networking? Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, I would add, I know that a lot of, if you're talking about specifically, scientists that you might see from companies or other academic groups at conferences, I do know that one thing that's really common nowadays is, especially the further the scientists get in their careers, they get a lot of emails from a lot of people who are asking them things like, hey, I saw you give a talk. Here's a copy of my resume or CV. Can you take a look at it and let me know if I'd be a good fit, right? And as much as I think those folks, and I get a lot of those too, as much as we try to be responsive, at some point, those, like Dr. Patucha said, if you think you're going to do it and then a week goes by, you're going to totally forget it. I think when you reach out to people, I think you need a much better hook, right, to get them to be interested in responding to you than just saying, hey, I saw your talk. Can you take a look at my resume? Ask them some technical questions about your talk. If you have some interesting questions that, if there had been time at the end of the talk, right, about that you can ask them about their research, or take a look at 1 or 2 of their papers and ask them some probing question about that, right? I think a lot of especially the technical folks who you might want to network with, are if they see an email coming from someone who expresses a real interest in some questions about their research, right, that's the kind of thing that might make them think, okay, I need to spend 15 minutes writing back to this person because they're actually interested in what I'm doing and not just sending me a CV. Right?
I think that's great advice.
One other thought I want to add to what Dr. Cahill was saying, these conferences, these virtual conferences, it's hit and miss. A lot of times they have these poster sessions where it's a virtual poster session, and I'll join in and there's nobody else on the line except for the poster presenter and myself. I'm like, wow, geez. So these are golden opportunities. I mean, some of them are credited, but a lot of them aren't. And this is the opportunity to ask individualized questions on a one-on-one basis, which you wouldn't be able to do in a typical conference setting. So take advantage of it.
Perfect. Just as a follow-up, I think what I heard was do your homework first. Make sure that, if you shouldn't be reaching out to someone and asking them if you're a good fit. You should already know if you're a potentially good fit by the fact that you've done your homework and asked some suitable questions. And like Dr. Nathan Cahill said, read some papers and in that regard. So, all right, there's a question in chat from Anna. It's mainly about switching from industry to academia. I believe what you're saying is it required a lot of statements, like a teaching statement, to do that. To apply for an academia position. How might you do that? What did you do? What about teaching statements? Just talk a little bit about that area. Anybody? going from industry to academia and all that's involved in applying for a teaching position?
I would say, one thing that I did when I was at Kodak was actually I knew some of the folks in the math department, and I taught as an adjunct a few times, and it was generally like low-level undergraduate classes. I would teach algebra or pre-calculus or something like that, right? But just taking and in the evenings, right? I might teach one course a year in the evenings, but by the time I jumped into academia, right, I was able to have things on my CV that showed that I had some teaching experience, right? And whether it's teaching experience during your PhD, like working as a TA for an instructor, or if you're in industry for a while, getting some opportunities to learn a bit about teaching, and whether it's teaching as an adjunct at a nearby college, whether it's teaching some internal courses at your company, right? Anything that you can establish that you can put on your resume to say, hey, look, I've had some experience, really helps the faculty search committees at universities feel that it's much less of a risk that you're going to come in without any teaching experience and, totally not know what you're doing in the classroom.
I think one of the questions that relates to that is that whole concept of a teaching philosophy statement. Is that something that you'll see in applying for those types of jobs? And what goes into preparing that philosophy statement?
Definitely. Yeah. I've been on a lot of faculty search committees, and that's a standard thing that all things ask. And it really is just a lot of the teaching philosophy statements I've seen have been talking about all sorts of different things. Some talk about a lot about their philosophy of sort of individual mentoring of students and taking students who are in the classroom and getting them involved in research and things like that. Others talk about how they've been thinking a lot about how they might more effectively teach special topics courses in their field. Others talk about how they would want to experiment with different types of pedagogy. So we definitely see lots of things all over the place in philosophy. I think what you want to do is put some thought into what you could do if you were given free rein in the classroom, because the one thing I can definitely say from reading a lot of teaching philosophies for faculty search positions is it's really easy to read something and tell when someone has just phoned it in and hasn't put any thought into their teaching philosophy, right? And that's really when you see something that it's clear that someone hasn't thought about it at all, and they just say the same sort of they say the same sort of things you might expect from everyone. That's like, oh, I care a lot about students and I want to be accessible. And if it's some bland generic statement, those committees will be able to tell.
So there's a couple questions out here related to how do you find a job in academia? How do you find a job in industry? Or what are your guys' suggestions in terms of where do you look for both? What's the best way to go about it? We know networking is important, but let's say what's the other spoke on the wheel? Networking and what else?
So I would say one thing is get involved and stay involved with whatever professional organization is related to your field. A lot of academic job listings are listed in the publications or sometimes direct job boards for a particular field, right? So like the Optical Society of America has an optics job listing. SPIE has an optics and imaging job listing. The Astronomical Society, the American Astronomical Society, has a big job board for academic job listings. So whatever happens to be your professional organization, usually fees for students to join those things are relatively low. And so if you're not part of a professional organization, I would do that just so you can get access to some of those sorts of tools.
Anyone else? Nathan? Raymond?
I was absolutely going to say professional societies, and then David said it. Yeah, I'd say exactly the same thing. Like in math, there's the American Mathematical Society, Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics. They're advertising lots of the positions. There's a website called mathjobs.org that every math PhD student who wants a faculty position is going to look at to see what jobs are placed. So definitely look at your professional societies. That's the key.
Just out of curiosity, and are there more jobs than there are students, or more students than there are jobs? And how do you set yourself apart from from, like you said, if there's 100 to 1,000 people applying for the same job, how are you going to set yourself apart from somebody else?
That's tough. Like, academic job market is really tough, right? Like in math, for instance, when we've been trying to hire applied mathematicians into faculty positions the last few years, we might have one position available and we'll easily get, maybe 150 qualified applicants that have had their PhD and some postdoc experience. So it is really tough. I think the important thing for academic job market is to really understand what the department is looking for, and to really understand what are their strengths already and how could you augment their strengths, right? Because there are a lot of great candidates out there, and what the departments are often looking for is someone who can come in with a particular strength that can really simultaneously augment what the current strengths are of the department, but also not be too far out to lunch that person couldn't come in and collaborate with a lot of the people that are already there. So you really want to make sure that to set yourself apart, make sure you really understand what that department is looking for, and tailor your statements, tailor your resume to that specific thing. And that may require doing that separately for every position that you apply for and coming up with different statements, but that's part of the game, I think.
Let me just say, we got about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that Anna, that her question was answered. Anna, if you could just type into the chat, I want to make sure we understood your question and answered it appropriately. And then we'll move on to another question from our Google Doc, if that's okay. Okay. All right. Yep. Anna, did you have a follow-up question that you wanted us to address? Or are you good? No. Okay. All right. So the next question on our Google Doc is, in your opinion, what are the main differences between careers in academic research, industry research, and research at a U.S. national laboratory or research center? So differences in various researches at, in the different venues, academic, industry, research, or U.S. national lab research. Who wants to tackle that one? Raymond, you got yours on. You unhooked first.
Yeah, first of all, if this is about doing research in those organizations, honestly, money. That's the biggest thing. If you're shooting to get a research job in industry, it's very, very similar to doing research in academia. Very similar to doing research at a national institution. But I think it's important that you get into a organization where you can fit, where the other people there, or the boss there has got a good rapport with others. So that may be the bigger thing than whether it's academia or industry.
So I would say, get familiar with the concept of, particularly for STEM students, get familiar with the concept of technology readiness level, TRL. This is a concept that's pushed largely by the Department of Defense, and there are very specific guidelines for what makes a particular concept or research area a different technology readiness level. They go from something like 0, which is, wow, I just had this idea, to 1, which is, oh, I mocked up a little bit of thing and this seems like it should work, all the way to, I built a benchtop prototype and demonstrated that it works, all the way to, I have a product that I can mass produce, right? In academia, we typically work on the low end of the technology readiness level. At big corporate research labs, they'll have the full gamut of things, right? So, if you go to one of the big corporate research labs, like used to be Kodak, but now even at places like Apple and Google, they'll have people working at all ends of that spectrum. A lot of companies focus only on the last part of that spectrum, right? They're only trying to take ideas and concepts and things that are already out there and get them into something that is productizable, something they can actually make. So I think it depends on the type of organization you're in, and where your particular group is within that organization as well.
I think one counterpoint I want to make to especially Dr. Patucha's original comment that research at companies versus research in academia is similar is that I think in a lot of ways it is, but I think in one important way that it took me a while to recognize once I moved from industry to academia is in work-life balance, right? So one thing I can certainly say is I was really lucky in the companies that I worked for at Kodak and Carestream Health, that the work-life balance was very much a priority, and from the top down, right? People, everyone in the organization knew it's like you were there from 8 to 5 during the weekdays, and you got to go home and do your own thing in the evenings and do your own thing on the weekends and do your own thing on the vacations. And so it was very compartmentalized. I think I found as first as a pre-tenure faculty and then getting tenure, academia is an entirely different beast. And this is not an RIT specific criticism. This is anywhere you go in academia, that academia will take as much as you will give it, right? And it's relentless in making faculty, especially pre-tenure faculty, think that you should not only be working during the day, but you should always be on in the evenings and doing a lot of things on the weekends. And so I think it takes a bit more self-reflection in how you're going to deal with that in your job. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that I've learned that I have to keep much more tabs on in my academic job than I ever did in industry, right?
That was a question from Xing Meng. It was talked about work intensity and the commitments that you're making between academia and big industry companies. Anybody else want to add to that?
And I also want to add that might not be across the board, right? I know that there are other companies where things are much more intense, and definitely if you're in a small company or in an entrepreneurial role or in a startup, right, you're much more likely to be facing much more significant issues with trying to maintain your work-life balance than you would be in a big company that can really afford to do that. So I don't know if Ray has any perspective on that as well, having.
I was just going to echo what you just said there about the small versus large companies, but and this is, I love RIT, and I was there for 8 years. I love everything about it, and maybe I'll come back. We'll see. But now that the past couple of months I've been back in industry, geez, I get like Saturdays and Sundays off. I'm like, what? And you want to do with me? Maybe I'll do like 2 hours on a Saturday morning, and then the rest of the day, I don't even feel guilty about not logging on the computer or doing things. So what Dr. Cahill said is absolutely correct. Academia is a 24/7, 7 days a week. I probably had 2 to 3 weeks total days of vacation in 8 years, working at RIT. And since now at Apple, I've gotten every single weekend off, at least one day, either Saturday or Sunday I've had off, and most weekends both. So it's an eye-awakening experience. So be prepared for that.
However, I have also heard horror stories, right? And we had a couple of students that went to work for a company in, a mid-sized company in Silicon Valley, and they thought it was great that all of a sudden they offered free dinner, and then they offered free dinner for them and their families. And the reason was they don't want you to go home, right? The only time you'll see your family is because you're eating at the company place, right?
That's true. A lot of the big companies do that. If you're there at 7 o'clock at night, they will give you free dinner if you stay until 7. Most people who do that eat the dinner and then go home right afterwards. So I don't know. It's a tough call. Right now, Apple is trying to change their reputation about hard workers. My boss will not respond to an email when he's on vacation or on a weekend. So, he works really hard, during the week, and then when he's off, he's off. You can't reach him. So I don't know. It's a good question.
So our time's about up. Cyril, do you have any last comments to the group? Would you like to present any questions, or does anybody else have comments they want to present? I think we addressed most of them. I think it was a really good conversation about resumes and networking and industry and academia, postdocs, timing, all of those sorts of things, networking. So go ahead, Cyril.
For last minute questions,
Okay, great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.